I'm Deanna Salo, and I'm the managing principal of Cray Kaiser Limited CPAs. And today I'm here with one of our other principals,
Brian Cott.
And we're going to be talking about our manufacturing clients. Cray Kaiser performs a number of services and has for our tenured period of time over 53 years with our manufacturing clients here in the Chicago area. And we want to talk about today some of the key indicators, the key challenges, some of the key observations we have when we're performing our auditing, advisory, review, tax planning procedures with our clients. And we're going to get started with really the three things that we're going to be talking about today. Brian, why don't you lead us off with those?
Sure. The three things we're going to talk about: some inventory pricing and the challenges we're seeing with our clients. We're also going to talk about the temporary labor, and we're going to close with some cybersecurity risks that we're seeing.
Yep. So inventory, right, huge item on a client's financial statements, really the brick and mortar of their profitability. We really want to focus in on, how clients are modeling their pricing to ensure they're capturing all of their costs when they're going out to bid in their pricing. The pricing models that we've seen some of our clients, I guess, what are some of the shortfalls that they have in terms of their pricing models?
I think the shortfalls they have in the pricing models is they don't include all the costs it truly takes to manufacture the product. And they might pick up labor, and I know I pay a guy X dollars an hour, but they forget about the other employment costs, the taxes that go along with that. And another big thing I see missed is also sometimes the rent costs and the building maintenance. Some of those other overhead costs that go into your facility to run your plant and your operations, those often get missed.
Right. So really what I call making sure your bill of materials, your BOM, is fully loaded. You've got to make sure that those costs are in your pricing model so that when you're telling your sales force to go out there and sell your goods, that you really know what your gross profit margin might be on those fully loaded costs. Again, sometimes the sales force, their drivers are to go out and sell. Go out and sell. And their financial acumen might not be at the calibration that they really know what the gross profit margin is for a certain company. So really educating your sales force to really understanding the financial pieces, the labor costs, the rent costs, the burden costs with respect to how to model the pricing. We've also seen some clients shift their commissions, right, in payments to their sales force, not on, sales volume, but also on gross profit margin, right? And making sure that they're yielding the right profitability consistently. They might have some volume discounts, they might have some other perks for some of their specific customers, but really making sure that they're honing in on all of their related bill of material costs is a really important part of that too. What's some of the other things that they should be doing in terms of making sure that the costing is there?
One thing I see often is they set a price, they look at their costing once a year, maybe they did it last year, and that in today's economy, the prices are changing so often, depending on what type of raw material that you're buying. I mean, there could be weekly swings, monthly swings in there. So I do recommend at a minimum, you're reviewing your costing at least twice a year and you are updating those numbers. And that's actually very generous when I say twice a year.
Yeah. We have a client that does use standard pricing, standard costing. And, they were only updating their prices once a year. So we got them to look at it at least 4 times a year, and depending upon what the variance might be, to do it even more frequently than just the once a year, yep. Right? It was something that it's an audit client, and we do look at their processes and procedures in terms of their standard costing. And while they were uploading and getting all the pricing there, they weren't really doing the full roll-up other than once a year. They actually now do it twice a year. But we've even leaned in a little bit more on them to say maybe even a little bit more often, because their raw material costs is steel, imports from China, and the tariffs and so forth that, we'll be going out there this year to audit them. So we'll be really interested to hear, how frequently they've even updated it for the current year. Another thing on inventory is, even on the sales side, some clients are really trying to diversify, right, through a whole bunch of different types of sales lanes. They want to expand, broaden what they're selling, how they're selling to stay competitive in the marketplace. You've got a client example that kind of didn't do that and just stuck true to what they do.
Yeah, I had a client, they were looking to expand into different lanes and kind of take over their supply chain for themselves. And they thought maybe we could start manufacturing these items that we're buying. And they decided not to. And the model was, we wanted to use the finances and invest in what we do well and do it better.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, they have had tremendous success by not expanding out and properly utilizing their capital funds.
Yeah. So using their capital funds, reinvesting in the things that they did well, and staying honed in on their costing and profitability, and they've been super successful. So there's a little bit of yin and yang, growing for the sake of growth, which, a lot of people could get, into that whole wheelhouse of let's grow to grow, but also stay profitable. And even beyond that is really being able to have the leverage that they had to get the costing at a place in their existing profitability that didn't compromise their growth. They stayed super profitable, stayed true to the costing, stayed true to the sales that they had, and continued on. The next thing we're going to talk about is temporary labor. Why don't you kick us off? Yeah.
A lot of challenges in temporary labor. As we all know, it's very hard to get skilled labor. So one thing I'm seeing in temporary labor is having a good production manager, a shop manager is key and very critical to the process, because nobody's paying attention to what's going on with the hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one client do a study, and they were having 4 temporary people show up every single day, and they didn't know if they even needed a temporary person for that day or not. And they would be there for about 2 hours, and then they would determine their need for the day, and they would send some of them home.
Mm-hmm.
But they had to pay them for the 2 hours that they did nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. As we go out and audit our clients, we'll walk the production floor, and you just start talking to people if they allow you to talk to the people, and say people are standing around. We had one manufacturer that we were watching the shift change, right? The machines were getting cleaned. It's actually food manufacturing. So they were doing a shift change, and they had over 20 people standing around for what was 2 hours while the shift was getting changed, while the machinery was getting changed. And I said, who's running the scheduling on the floor? And they said, oh, the supervisor's off today. And went upstairs to the client's main office and talked to the owner at the time. And I said, listen, you've been talking about your labor costs are just skyrocketing. You're not quite sure why everything was so high. I go, I just was on the floor for 15 minutes and saw 20 people standing there idly waiting for the shift change. You may want to take another look at that. So while temporary labor is so critical to our clients' success, the seasonality of their businesses, needing more people, needing less people, finding the skilled trades, temporary labor is kind of, I think, part of the brick and mortar of any company right now. They need them. They wildly need those people in there. But then how to manage those costs, how to supervise those costs, having a supervisor or a scheduler predictively look at the week's worth of manufacturing and plan out when those shift changes are, when those people are needed to show up. Clearly, the people can't just walk in and get on the line, but do we need a 15-minute transition or a half-hour transition? Certainly not 2 hours or 3 hours and then go home, right? We also had another client where they were wondering about their labor costs as well. And they had a kiosk for time entry, specifically for the temporary labor, and that was connected to the temporary labor company. So the temporary labor workers would come in, be logging their time, keep punching in and out, and then their full-time employees that worked for actually the company had a different keypad that they were keying in their time. And what we found out, we actually did an agreed upon procedure. We actually did a little bit of auditing with respect to the labor and found out that the labor times were not being approved. While their employees' time records were getting approved by the floor manager, the temporary labor was not getting approved by the floor manager. So really just adding a procedure to verify that all the labor costs, the time entry is appropriate, is a huge part of managing that inventory cost as well. I mean, right now in today's market, your labor costs and your rent, your occupancy costs are probably, outside of raw materials, are your single largest costs for any company. Your labor costs and your occupancy costs. even as people are downsizing in their offices, office space is still pretty expensive, even commercial manufacturing real estate as well. So being able to manage, optimize, and supervise those functions is another really important part of that too.
You know, we've talked about skilled labor a couple times. That term has come up, and we do also have some staffing agencies, and I know that they're trying to start up actually skilled labor divisions and get people certified in certain areas. But I think you have an interesting story with one of your clients on how are they getting skilled labor inside their plant?
Absolutely. So even trying to find temporary employees to come work for their company to then be used as a temporary source, some of our clients actually created apprenticeships and almost their own little universities to create some skilled training. They've gone into high schools, they've gone into some of the community colleges, some of the trade colleges that are out there, and actually solicited to them, hey, you want to get an internship, you want to get an apprenticeship, and it's a paid apprenticeship, it's a paid internship to get their certifications while going to school. And then after they've graduated, they've actually procured their new employees, whether it be for the temporary staffing company or even some of my manufacturers as well. So there's lots of opportunities to try to build up the skilled workforce. And sometimes it's just a matter of education. And I can say that from a temporary staffing and even an employee base, you know, getting people excited about working on these lines, which are very sophisticated. They take a lot of skilled labor to do that, is a great career for some of those folks. You know, we talk about the line, right? The manufacturing line. You know, we're all dealing with, you know, AI, artificial intelligence, and the automation, right, that we see in some of our clients. Brian, you know, speak to some of that automation and some of the AI considerations for some of our clients.
Yeah, so we have some injection molding clients, and we're seeing them put in a lot of you know, AI and automated equipment to do that. You see a lot of it in the steel industry as well too, in welding machines and cutting machines. So that's replacing some of the employee workforce that is needed.
But the CapEx requirements are significant for those. So while you're exchanging the labor force, you are having CapEx costs. We have some manufacturers that actually do some of the folding and packaging and even cellophane wrapping of the boxes, and even as much as rolling it off the line and putting it on a forklift truck that then an actual human, a forklift truck driver, puts it up on the stack. So, you know, the automation is not new in manufacturing, but I think AI is a definite consideration in terms of even quality control in food manufacturing, food processing. That's been there forever. You know, the automation of finding a defect as it leaves the line, but even the packaging and the handling that goes to parts and goods that are coming off of a manufacturing line, automating those processes. You know, you're exchanging labor with CapEx, but the CapEx needs repairs. The CapEx needs somebody to monitor those improvements. So, you know, each company really has to sit with their own financials and see what are some of the exchanged costs, how can I become more efficient, and even provide a better product line with some of that automation. Or maybe I stay to the, you know, the manual labor piece of it because what I'm making is so fairly procured that I really need that individual hand packing and sorting and moving of items off the line.
So I would ask anybody listening, think about your manufacturing plan, and if you have temporary labor or not. What if you were to cut out 2 hours a day for 4 employees for a week for the whole year? How much would that save you on the bottom line?
And I think that's a really important part too. The temporary labor, again, it's here to stay. We all need that skilled labor force, no matter what industry you're in, but really making sure that you're optimizing, paying for that supervisory manager, workflow, scheduler to make sure that everybody's being used at their highest and best use, whether they're a full-time employee or the temporary staff, is really a huge part of you know, some of the gross profit margins and the inventory costing that we've been talking about. In terms of internal controls, I mean, this would speak to manufacturers and even any other industries. You know, we've seen our fair share of cybersecurity defaults and breaches this year with our clients, and really it's the money handling, right? It's, you know, payable checks getting washed, getting stolen in the mail. It's ACH, wires that are not getting double and triple confirmed. I guess, Brian, speak to some of those examples.
Cybersecurity is not new, and we've been facing with it for many years, but it's still ongoing. And the intruders are getting more aggressive, and they're getting better at what they're doing, and they're using AI now to create these emails and try and go after you. So one thing I have seen very recently is internal emails that are spoofed. Maybe I get an email from Deanna. It says dsalo@craykaiser.com, and it says, Brian, will you please wire $100,000 to a vendor that I would know? And I might just go ahead and do it because I think it's coming from Deanna. So these emails are very sophisticated. We have seen that happen. So what are some controls we want to put around place of ACHs? ACH is a good way to go. We don't want to be doing paper checks. So what would you put around an ACH to help control that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the financial institutions even have new programs to help customers, help companies kind of play alongside your banking transactions. You providing limitations for an amounts of an ACH. You may have 2 or 3 people within your organization that might have to call in, or multi-factor authentication, or pick up the phone. The old adage of picking up the phone to verify it and talking to the person who actually requested the payment, or the vendor or the bank, is, still today is still a best practice. Verifying. But we do see a lot of financial institutions, helping companies, providing extra services, which are worth it in the long run, because it only takes one check, one ACH to go to the wrong player, and then you not having that money, and those funds are now confiscated. And it's going to take more than just the bank to try to find out on how to get it back. From an internal control perspective as well, making sure clients have a segregation of duties. As auditors here, we're always looking for segregation of duties. And accounting is usually pretty lean, right?
Yeah.
Our clients don't necessarily have infrastructure for 3 to 5 to 7 people to segregate their duties. So we find that even just some double checks, cross checks, laying on top of your banking and financial transactions, especially in today's environment where clients are buying goods from China, they're having to pay different gatekeeper fees and things like that, ports, fees, and they've got to ACH money. You definitely need to up your game in terms of your procedures. You may not need to add people to the tally of adding internal controls, but you got to add the other P, and that other P is procedures. Adding some few procedures, whether it's coming alongside with the bank to getting some additional procedures performed there to help you with your banking transactions, or even your internal procedures. Accounts payable is going to issue a check to a vendor. The vendor requires a paper check. You really need to make sure that you can get some ACH availability to them in order to get their money faster. I think vendors on the other side should be pretty excited about getting their money faster.
Yeah, and if your vendors are requesting paper checks and that's the only way they'll take it, you check with your bank on what's called positive pay. And it's a process where it matches up the check number and the amount to the checks when they clear the bank.
And that helps defray some of those cyber attacks and fraudulent funds getting moved from company to company. I think just ask your banker, how often does your banker see a fraud or a cyber check that's happening with them at the bank? They probably, it used to maybe be 1 a day or 2 a day that they might see. It's probably dozens a day. So the better you can create some internal controls, add a few procedures, talk to your bank about some of the processes they have, the positive pay and the like. And there's fees to that, but the fees, the cost and the risk may outweigh it's
an insurance.
An insurance on getting those checks processed accordingly. And the other thing too is, we see a number of clients having multiple checking accounts. They use a specific checking account just for their bill pays, and they keep a limited balance in there. And they may have what is otherwise a sweep account that sweeps money in and out of it to ensure that in the account that might have exposure to the public, their vendors or ACH, that those are limited in terms of the balances that are there. So keeping the rest of your residual funds in a separate bank account, and then just moving that bill paying function back and forth to that bank account. Again, just continuing to limit your risk of exposure with respect to losing funds in those situations. Manufacturing has an extra layer of that because our clients are typically sending money all over the globe, for their purchasing of their raw materials, transit costs, transportation costs, and the like. So they are paying a broader group of people. They're getting the best prices on raw materials, so they may have hundreds and hundreds of vendors other than maybe a different type of a company that might have 20 to 30 vendors, and that's who they all work with. The more vendors you have and the more payments you're drawing every month, the more susceptibility you have to some of these cybersecurity attacks with respect to your banking accounts.
Yeah, and whenever in doubt, call your vendor and ask and verify.
Yep, ask and verify. Yeah, we always say trust and verify, but in this situation, we're going to say ask and verify. There's a host of challenges that we see our manufacturers, but I think with every challenge comes opportunity. We're seeing our clients staying very true to form with respect to their pricing models, making sure they're incorporating all of their bill of materials, all of their costs, their burdens, overheads, and the like, in their pricing models, shifting pricing models as they need to during the year, right? And talking with their customers. Their customers are also potentially selling these goods to somebody else. And so, only so much can get passed on to the end user, which is typically us, the consumers, right? And whatever we're buying. At the same time, it's the communication and making sure that you really understand what that gross profit margin is. That temporary labor, again, you're going to have it, but understanding your workflow environment, the scheduling, the management of those hours on the floor, cutting costs there as you possibly can. And then lastly, just protecting your bank accounts, making sure that those wire transfers, ACHs, vendor payments that are going all over the world are hosted in a place that has some best practices within your company.
And if you have any questions, please contact us.
And you can contact Deanna Salo or Brian Cott at Cray Kaiser at www.craykaiser.com, and we're here to help. Thanks so much for listening in.